Taking a look at the Allstate Sugar Bowl, the other college football playoff semifinal game, Clemson playing Ohio State. Clemson comes in 10-1, ACC champion. Remember, they split with Notre Dame, lost to them 47-40, about two-thirds of the way through the season, and then got their revenge in the ACC championship game, winning that matchup 34-10 with Trevor Lawrence and with all the pieces back in place on that defense. Really dominating performance. They come into the playoff as the two seed, host playing Ohio State, 6-0, Big Ten champion, very abbreviated schedule. You know, in my opinion, when you look at the rosters of Ohio State and Clemson, it's hard to argue against both of them not being there, particularly Ohio State, even though they were only 6-0. And there was a big debate on whether or not, they should be there. Are they good enough to be there? Do they deserve to be there? If there's ever a year where the playoff committee was going to look at a team in which they deserve to go and maybe not necessarily be the best team on paper, this I felt was the year that we would see that. It didn't happen. Ohio State is in 6-0, beat Nebraska, Penn State, Rutgers, Indiana, Michigan State, and Northwestern. In my opinion, of all the conferences that I've watched so far in 2020, the Big Ten for me is the one that I'm just not sure of, and I'm just not sure how Ohio State's going to play with Clemson in this matchup. I like Clemson here. Now, with that being said, I like a lot of the Big Ten bowl matchups. So I love the Big Ten bowl matchups. I like a lot of the teams in the Big Ten. They haven't played a tough schedule. Most of them are fresh. Most of the players are there. They've only played some of these teams 6-7 games. But I don't think this is a good matchup for Ohio State. But let's get into it. Let's get into the key players. Obviously, Clemson, it's nothing new, right? I mean, we're used to these names. These are the big names that we have seen all season long with college fantasy football. Trevor Lawrence, 29 total touchdowns this year, over 2,700 passing yards. Travis Etienne, 882 yards rushing. He's 118 shy of 1,000-yard season, has totaled 15 touchdowns this year. And really, that's it. Like Alabama, three of the four college football teams, playoff teams have in common is that we're going to see a lot of Najee Harris for Alabama. We're going to see a lot of Travis Etienne for Clemson, and we're going to see a lot of Kyron Williams for Notre Dame. Over on the Ohio State side, it's going to be a little bit of a mystery to us to see how this game unfolds. Probably ride with the hot hand. Master Teague has seemed to be the number one back for the Buckeyes all season long, but the game that Trey Sermon had in the Big Ten championship may allow him and may force the coaches to get the ball in his hands a little bit more in this college football playoff game. So it'll be interesting to see that dynamic unfold. The backfield rotation at Ohio State between Teague and Sermon, if there is one. If they're going to go with the guy that has the momentum, it's certainly going to be Trey Sermon, but it's hard for me to think that Master Teague will not get his touches in this game either as well. So we'll see how that plays out. But there's no, Chris Olave missed the Big Ten championship. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, those two definitely the 1-2, right? I mean, they're going to be the 1-2 options in the passing game. And no arguments there. I mean, Garrett Wilson has been, per game, one of the better receivers in college fantasy football this year. Chris Olave missed the Big Ten championship, but between those two guys, Justin Fields has a weapon on both sides of the ball. That's great for him, and that's great for the matchups for what the defense gives them. As I mentioned, Justin Fields, 20 total touchdowns in the 6 games that Ohio State has played. He's going to have to play well in this game because when you look at the matchups here on paper, we know what we're getting with the offenses of Clemson and Ohio State. We're getting a little bit more of a balanced attack with Ohio State. They're averaging 275 on the ground, 250 in the air. Keep in mind, though, that is against a Big Ten schedule. It is against a shortened season, whereas we have a little bit more of a sample size with Clemson, 11 games. Averaging 163 on the ground, 343 in the air, 44 points per game compared to Ohio State's 42. Defensively, the Buckeyes have given up 21 points, about 96 yards on the ground, 260 in the air. For me, and well, let's talk about the Clemson defense. 17.5 points allowed, 99 on the ground, 198 through the air. When you look at the schedule and you look at some of the points allowed, I think you have to go back really to around the Syracuse game or even Boston College game when Clemson was behind. That's when the injuries were starting to mount up a little bit, where they started to give up a lot of points. But then you look at the last three games: Pitt, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, 17, 10, 10. That's probably what we're going to see. If you go back and look at Clemson's schedule, particularly earlier in the season when they were healthy, they dominated the first halves of games. So sometimes it's hard to read into the total number of Clemson of what they've given up because of how dominant they have been in the first half of a lot of these matchups. Now, on the other hand, for Ohio State, traditionally they're quick starters. We know that Indiana, they jumped up on Indiana. Indiana came back on them. We know also that it took a little while for them to get going against Northwestern. I think they opened up with a score. There were several missed scoring opportunities in that game for both teams. Could have gone either way. But when you look at the Ohio State schedule, Nebraska, Penn State, Rutgers, Indiana, Michigan State, Northwestern, I just wonder, even though I like some of these teams, when you look, Indiana, they don't have Michael Penix now. Northwestern's the other team that's in a bowl game. They get Auburn, who's without a coach. But other than those two games, I don't really see a really good win on Ohio State that makes me think that they have a chance to run through Clemson. And I just say that because it seems to me that Ohio State just even though there's a lot of pieces back from last year, it seems to me they're lacking something that they never had last year. And I don't know if that's Justin Fields. We know what we're going to get with Travis Etienne. We know we're going to get with Trevor Lawrence. He's got receivers of Amari Rogers. He can utilize Cornell Powell. He's got Braden Galloway, EJ Williams, the youngster starting to emerge as well. But I look at Rogers and Powell really as the two best options in that passing game. But for me, it's about tried and true and trusted Trevor Lawrence in this matchup. And I don't know. I think we could say tried and true Justin Fields, but I don't know if we can use trusted right now after seeing some of the decisions he made throwing the ball in that Big Ten championship game. We know that Clemson's defense is going to be ready. We know what Clemson's defense did to him in the playoff game last year for some turnovers. Can he overcome that mentally? And can he get over that mental hump of what happened last year against Clemson? And if he does, Ohio State has a shot. I just don't know if that's going to happen. Clemson opened up 7.5-point favorite, 65.5 total. I think both of these teams are going to score points. So if I were to lean one way or the other, I'm definitely going to go over on this one. The offenses are just too good not to have a ton of points on the board. But I do like Clemson in this, and I probably like them minus the 7.5. We mentioned the key players. I think it's pretty much straightforward. These college football playoff games are straightforward. You got to go with Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, and if I had to go with one receiver off of Clemson, I'm going with Amari Rogers, who's caught 69 passes, almost 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns this year. Cornell Powell's got 743 and 5. If I'm going with one guy right now, I'm going with Amari Rogers. I think Amari Rogers over the course of the season when Trevor Lawrence has been the quarterback has looked like his go-to receiver. On the Ohio State side, I think you're kind of splitting hairs if you're going with Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave. I like Garrett Wilson a little better. He's been there all year, every game, healthy. And I just think it looks like Fields looks for Wilson often, and that's great from a college fantasy football standpoint. You're going to get a lot of targets his way. Olave is still going to get a lot of targets too. But if I had to pick one or the other right now, particularly for a possession, like a third down, first down completion, I think Fields is looking more for Garrett Wilson, where I think Olave may be a little bit more of a vertical threat for him. Opposite Garrett Wilson. And then in the backfield, I think if I had to pick a guy between Master Teague and Sermon, I'd probably go with Sermon right now just because he did what he did in the Big Ten championship. His confidence is probably sky high. They're probably feeling good about what he brought to the table. And they probably feel like they have an added wrinkle now to their offense, with the way that Sermon ran in that Big Ten championship game. They're probably feeling a lot better about their run game right now. And for that reason, I'd probably take Trey Sermon over Master Teague. With that, let's just get right into the picks. I think this is one of those games where you look at on paper. We've seen it last year. We feel like we're seeing it again. I just don't know in my opinion. And I don't know if it's just the small sample size that we have of Ohio State and not so much out of conference stuff for the Big Ten. But for me, I'm really questioning Ohio State right now in this matchup. Um, it looks like Clemson has the pieces of the puzzle put back together. They look solidified. Any team, any game with any team, any Clemson team, any game in which they have Trevor Lawrence healthy, they're gonna have a shot to win, as we saw last year. To me, I'm taking Clemson. I'm going to go ahead and give the 7.5. I would not surprise me if Clemson wins this game by a couple of touchdowns. I'm going to go Clemson minus the 7.5, and I'm going to go over the total of 65.5 because I think there's going to be quite a few points scored in this game. And it's particularly if Clemson jumps out early, jumps on top, I still think Ohio State's going to be able to catch up and score points some type of way. So I'm going over the total of 65.5.